The dust rises in columns that seem to touch the sky itself, and beneath it, a young man with mismatched eyes, one blue, one brown, sits perfectly still on his black warhorse, watching the largest army ever assembled in human history march toward him, and he smiles, because Alexander of Macedon has been waiting his entire 25 years for this exact moment, this impossible moment, when everything he has claimed to be, every wild boast, every audacious dream, will either be proven gloriously true or catastrophically, fatally false. It is October 1st, 331 BCE, and the fate of the known world will be decided before sunset on a deliberately flattened plain in northern Mesopotamia, a killing ground that the Persian king of kings, Darius III, has spent months preparing specifically to destroy the Macedonian king who has already humiliated him twice, who has conquered half his empire, who refuses to die, and who now stands outnumbered more than 5-1 by the greatest military force ever gathered under a single banner. This is not a battle. This is an execution, meticulously planned, and Darius has even ordered the earth itself reshaped, smoothed perfectly flat across miles of terrain to accommodate his secret weapons, the scythed chariots and the massed cavalry that will crush Alexander's tiny army like an avalanche of bronze and flesh. Yet as Alexander surveys the endless Persian lines stretching beyond the horizon in both directions, as his generals whisper urgently that they should attack at night when numbers matter less, he does something that will echo through military academies for the next 2,000 years. He refuses, he will fight in broad daylight, he will give Darius every advantage because Alexander doesn't just want to win, he wants to break the Persian Empire so completely, so utterly, that it will never rise again, and more than that, deeper than that, he wants to prove something that no one in the ancient world truly believes. That a king who leads from the front, who bleeds with his men, who studies his enemy with the intensity of a philosopher and strikes with the precision of a surgeon, can defeat any force, no matter how vast, no matter how impossible the odds. What happens in the next 9 hours will not just determine who rules the world from Greece to India. It will redefine what human beings believe is possible when genius confronts power, when innovation faces tradition, when a tactical mind operating at the absolute peak of human capability encounters an opponent who has made one fatal, irreversible mistake. He has given Alexander exactly the battlefield Alexander wanted. And now, as the sun climbs higher and the two greatest armies on earth begin their inexorable advance toward collision, the young Macedonian king is about to teach the world a lesson in warfare so revolutionary that generals will still be studying it when men walk on the moon. To understand how catastrophically everything is about to go wrong for Darius, you have to understand what has led to this moment, because this is actually the third time these two kings have faced each other, and Darius has lost twice already. First at the Granicus River, where Alexander announced his arrival in Asia with a cavalry charge so reckless his own generals thought he had gone mad. Then at Issus, where Darius personally fled the battlefield despite having a massive numerical advantage, abandoning his mother, his wife, his children, his treasure, everything, in a panicked retreat that humiliated him before the entire empire. And now, 2 years later, Darius has had time to prepare, time to gather forces from every corner of his vast realm, from the steppes of Scythia to the mountains of Afghanistan, from the deserts of Arabia to the highlands of Armenia, contingents speaking dozens of languages, worshipping different gods, but all united in service to the King of Kings, the ruler of the Achaemenid Empire that has dominated the known world for 2 centuries, the empire of Cyrus the Great and Xerxes, the empire that once nearly conquered Greece itself, and Darius has assembled them here at Gaugamela, a name that will become synonymous with tactical genius and imperial collapse, and he has chosen this ground carefully, rejecting the mountainous terrain that might favor Alexander's more maneuverable forces, instead selecting a broad plain near the modern Iraqi city of Mosul, and he has gone further, spending precious weeks having his engineers level the ground, remove rocks and obstacles, create the perfect surface for his chariot charge and his overwhelming cavalry superiority. Because Darius has learned from his defeats, he thinks he has adapted, he has prepared, and he is certain, absolutely certain, that this time will be different. The Persian king's plan is actually quite sound in theory. He will use his vastly superior numbers to envelope Alexander's flanks, surround his army completely, then crush it from all sides while the scythe chariots, those nightmarish weapons with blades extending from their wheels, designed to mow through infantry like wheat, break the Macedonian lines, and he has infantry reserves, elephant corps from India, the best cavalry in the world, including the fearsome Bactrian horsemen who have never been defeated, and he has positioned himself at the center of his line. This time determined not to flee, determined to prove his courage, to restore his honor, to be the king his empire needs him to be. And as dawn breaks on October 1st, as the two armies complete their final preparations, Darius must feel something like confidence, because how could any force, no matter how well trained, no matter how brilliantly led, possibly survive what he is about to unleash? The numbers are not just in his favor. They are overwhelmingly, absurdly, impossibly in his favor, and yet, there is something he doesn't fully understand about the young man across the plain, something that all of Alexander's enemies eventually learned too late. Alexander doesn't fight battles the way other generals fight battles. He doesn't think about warfare the way other commanders think about warfare, because Alexander was taught by Aristotle to see patterns, to break complex problems into components, to find the single point where maximum force applied will collapse the entire structure. And more than that, Alexander has studied every battle Darius has ever fought, has interrogated Persian deserters, has learned the Persian language, has read their military manuals, has absorbed their culture and tactics with the same intensity he once absorbed Homer and Euripid, and he knows something crucial, something that will prove fatal to Darius. The Persian king for all his resources, for all his preparation, is predictable. 2. He fights the way Persian kings have always fought, with mass, with splendor, with overwhelming force applied across a broad front. And this means that if you can decode the pattern, if you can anticipate the moves, you can counter them, you can exploit them, you can turn the enemy's strength into weakness, and that is exactly what Alexander has spent the last several days preparing to do. The night before the battle, Alexander does something that shocks his officers. He sleeps like a baby, so deeply that his generals have to wake him when the army is already assembled and ready to march, and when they express amazement that he can rest so peacefully before the most important battle of his life. He explains with characteristic confidence that Darius has finally given him what he's always wanted, a decisive engagement on open ground where there can be no excuses, no retreats, no uncertainty, and this tells you something profound about Alexander's psychology, because he genuinely believes that he cannot lose, not because he is arrogant, though he is that too, but because he has calculated every variable, prepared for every contingency, and he knows that what he is about to attempt has never been done before in military history but will work if executed with perfect timing and perfect discipline. And his army, this magnificent instrument of war that his father Philip created and Alexander has perfected, is capable of that perfection, because these are not ordinary soldiers. These are men who have trained together for years, who trust their officers absolutely, who worship Alexander with something approaching religious fervor, who have followed him across 2,000 miles of conquest and have never been defeated, and they are organized in a way that gives Alexander options that Darius cannot even imagine. The flexible Macedonian phalanx with its 18-foot sarissas creating an impenetrable wall of spear points, the Hypaspes who can fight as heavy infantry or light skirmishers depending on need, the companion cavalry, Alexander's elite horsemen who will follow him straight into hell if he asks, and behind all of this, the tactical innovations that Philip introduced and Alexander has refined. The hammer and anvil strategy where infantry fixes the enemy in place while cavalry delivers the killing blow, the use of combined arms coordination that allows different unit types to support each other in ways that multiply their effectiveness, the emphasis on mobility and rapid response that lets a Macedonian army punch far above its weight, and most crucially, the absolute authority Alexander exercises over his forces, the ability to shift units, change plans, exploit opportunities in real time during the chaos of battle, something that Darius, commanding through a complex hierarchy of satraps and nobles, simply cannot match. As Alexander's army forms up in the pre-dawn darkness, they can see the Persian campfires stretching to the horizon, thousands upon thousands of fires, and they know they are outnumbered catastrophically, 5 or 6 to 1 by most estimates, perhaps worse, but they also know something else. They are about to watch their king perform magic, because that is how Alexander's tactical genius appears to those who witness it, like sorcery, like the gods themselves intervening, and what is about to happen on this carefully prepared plain will seem so impossible, so contrary to every assumption about how warfare works, that even those who survive it will struggle to explain how it happened. The sun rises blood-red through the dust, and the two armies begin their approach, and immediately Alexander does something unexpected. He doesn't advance straight forward. He begins moving his entire line diagonally, toward his right, angling away from the center of the Persian position, and Darius, watching from his command chariot at the center of his vast host, immediately recognizes the danger, because Alexander is moving toward the edge of the carefully prepared ground, toward the rougher terrain that Darius's engineers specifically worked to avoid, and more importantly, he is moving away from the flank positions where Darius has concentrated his strongest cavalry forces, the Bactrians and Scythians who are supposed to envelope and destroy the Macedonian wings, and Darius has to respond. He orders his entire line to shift left, to stay aligned with Alexander, to keep the Macedonian army on the prepared ground where the chariots can operate, where the cavalry can maneuver, and this is already a small victory for Alexander because he has forced Darius to react, to dance to his tune, and as the two armies continue the strange lateral shuffle across the plain, both moving right in a kind of deadly parallel procession, Alexander is stretching the Persian line, pulling it thinner, creating gaps, and Darius, growing frustrated, decides to launch his first major attack. He sends the scythe chariots, those terrifying weapons that are supposed to shatter the Macedonian phalanx, and this should be the moment where Alexander's infantry breaks, where panic spreads, where the legendary discipline cracks, because a scythe chariot charge is one of the most fearsome sights in ancient warfare, the thundering horses, the whirling blades designed to dismember anyone in their path. But Alexander has prepared for this exact moment. He has drilled his men in specific anti-chariot tactics, and as the chariots bear down on the Macedonian lines, something extraordinary happens. The infantry doesn't stand rigid like a traditional phalanx. Instead, the formations open, creating corridors, lanes through which the chariots can pass harmlessly. And as they thunder through Macedonian light infantry, javelin men and archers positioned specifically for this purpose pour missiles into the chariot crews and horses from the sides, while other soldiers grab the reins, pull drivers from their seats, hamstring the horses, and within minutes the great chariot attack has been completely neutralized, the survivors careening uselessly past the Macedonian rear or being systematically destroyed, and Darius has just wasted one of his trump cards, and worse, his men have just watched an attack that was supposed to be devastating get methodically dismantled, and the psychological impact of that cannot be overstated, because the Persians are starting to realize that this Macedonian army is different, that conventional tactics don't work against it, that Alexander has an answer for everything. Now Darius commits his cavalry on both flanks, sending massive forces of horsemen to envelope Alexander's wings, to get around his flanks and attack from the rear, and this is where the numerical superiority should tell, where 5-to-1 odds should be decisive, because even the best infantry cannot stand against cavalry attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. But Alexander has anticipated this too. He has positioned units specifically to counter the flanking attempts, light cavalry, and mobile infantry on the far right to screen his flank, and on the left he has placed Parmenion, his most experienced general, in command of the Thessalian cavalry with specific orders to hold at all costs, to absorb the Persian assault, to keep Darius's forces engaged even if it means taking heavy casualties, because Parmenion's job is not to win on that flank, his job is to survive, to be the anvil that fixes Persian forces in place. And the fighting on both wings becomes absolutely brutal. Thousands of cavalry swirling in massive melees, horses screaming, men dying, dust so thick you cannot see 10 feet, and the Persians are gaining ground, They are pushing back Alexander's flanks through sheer weight of numbers. Parmenion sends an urgent message to Alexander that he is being overwhelmed, that he needs reinforcements immediately, and this is the critical moment, the moment where most generals would do the safe thing, would send help to shore up the threatened flank. But Alexander reads the battlefield differently. He sees something that no one else sees yet. In committing so heavily to the flanking attacks, Darius has pulled cavalry away from his center, the Persian line has stretched and thinned, and somewhere in that vast host there is a gap, a weakness, and if Alexander can find it, if he can hit it with perfect timing and overwhelming force at a single point, he can cut straight through to Darius himself, and if Darius falls or flees, the entire Persian army will collapse regardless of what is happening on the flanks, so Alexander makes a decision that will either win the battle or lose it catastrophically. He ignores Parmenion's plea for help, trusts that his general can hold a little longer, and instead he begins assembling his strike force, the companion cavalry, the royal squadron, the hypaspists, every elite unit he has, massing them into a wedge formation pointed like a spear at the Persian center. And he is going to lead it himself, personally, because that is what Alexander does. He doesn't command from the rear, he rides at the front of the charge. He will be the first to hit the enemy line, the first to risk death, and his men love him for it. They will follow him anywhere because he asks nothing of them that he won't do himself, and as he prepares for the charge that will decide everything, he can see the gap in the Persian lines developing, can see the exact moment when Darius's formation becomes vulnerable, and he gives the order, and the companion cavalry surges forward in a perfect wedge, Alexander at the tip, and they accelerate from trot to canter to full gallop, and the earth shakes with the thunder of 2,000 horses bearing down on a single point in the Persian center like a battering ram aimed at a door. And this is the moment, this is where everything balances on a knife's edge, because if the Persians hold, if they close the gap, if they concentrate enough force to stop the charge, Alexander will be surrounded deep in enemy territory and his entire plan will collapse. But if he breaks through, if he can reach Darius, the wedge hits the Persian line with cataclysmic force, and there is a sound like the world breaking. Metal on metal, men screaming, horses colliding, and Alexander is in the absolute thick of it. His lance shattered almost immediately, fighting with his sword, and his personal bodyguards are dying around him. Men throwing themselves between their king and Persian weapons, and the charge should bog down, should lose momentum in the press of bodies. But Alexander has trained his cavalry for exactly this kind of penetration attack. They don't spread out like traditional cavalry. They stay concentrated, they push forward like a moving fortress, and the Macedonian hypaspists are running alongside the horses, protecting their flanks, killing anyone who tries to stop the charge, and inch by inch, foot by foot, the wedge is driving deeper into the Persian center, and Alexander can see Darius now, can see the Persian king in his magnificent command chariot surrounded by his bodyguard, can see the royal standard, and he turns his horse directly toward it, makes it obvious that he is coming for Darius personally. And this is psychological warfare of the highest order because Darius knows, everyone around him knows, that if Alexander reaches him, if this wild Macedonian king gets close enough to attack him personally, Darius will die because Alexander is not just a tactician, he is one of the deadliest individual warriors in his army, and the Persian bodyguard does what it is supposed to do. It forms a wall around their king, elite Persian immortals who have sworn to die before they let harm reach Darius. And they do die. They die in droves as the Macedonian wedge crashes into them. But there are so many of them, and they are so desperate to protect their king, that the charge finally begins to slow, and for a moment it seems like it might stop, like the Persians might hold, and if they hold for just a few more minutes, Darius's superior numbers will envelope the Macedonian wedge and annihilate it. But Alexander has one more trick. He has held back a small reserve, his absolute best cavalry, and now he commits them, sends them crashing into the Persian immortals from a slightly different angle, and this creates just enough confusion, just enough disruption, that the wedge starts moving again, and Darius is watching this unstoppable force cutting toward him, watching his bodyguard die, watching Alexander, covered in blood, horse foaming, but still coming, always coming, get closer, and Darius makes the same decision he made at Issus. the decision that will define his reign and his legacy and ultimately cost him everything. He runs, he turns his chariot around and flees the battlefield, and the moment the Persian army sees their king retreat, sees the royal standard moving away from the fight, something breaks in them, because if the King of Kings himself doesn't believe the battle can be won, why should they die for it? But the battle is not over. In fact, in some ways it is just beginning. Because while Alexander has broken the Persian center and sent Darius fleeing, the Persian flanks are still fighting, are still winning in fact. And on the left wing, Parmenion is in serious trouble. Persian cavalry has gotten around his flank and is threatening the Macedonian camp, threatening to cut off Alexander's line of retreat, and some Persian forces have actually broken through and are looting the Macedonian baggage train, and Parmenion sends another desperate message to Alexander. Come back, we are being destroyed, we need you here. But Alexander faces an agonizing choice. He can pursue Darius, can perhaps catch and kill the Persian king right now and end the war in a single stroke, or he can turn back and save his own army. And this is one of the few times in Alexander's career where he chooses caution over audacity, where he decides that securing victory is more important than achieving the spectacular, and he wheels the companion cavalry around and rides back across the battlefield. And what follows is one of the most vicious cavalry melees in ancient history, because the Persian cavalry that has been beating Parmenion suddenly finds itself caught between the Thessalians in front and Alexander's companions behind. And they are elite horsemen, they don't surrender easily, and the fighting is desperate and brutal, and Alexander himself is nearly killed when his horse Bucephalus, the legendary war horse that has carried him through every battle, is wounded, and for a moment there is genuine danger that the Macedonian king might be pulled from his saddle and killed in the swirling melee. But his bodyguard closes around him, gives him time to mount a fresh horse, and slowly, painfully, the Macedonian cavalry superiority begins to tell. Not in numbers but in cohesion, in discipline, in the fact that Alexander is there personally directing the fight, shifting units, identifying weak points, and the Persian cavalry begins to break, begins to stream away from the battlefield, and suddenly the entirety of Darius's great host is in retreat. Not an organized withdrawal but a panicked rout. 250,000 men fleeing in every direction, and Alexander wants to pursue immediately, wants to chase Darius down while the trail is fresh. But his army is exhausted, has been fighting for 9 hours straight, men and horses are on the verge of collapse, and he has to make the painful decision to let Darius escape once again, to settle for the victory rather than risk everything on a pursuit that might leave his army scattered and vulnerable. The aftermath of Gaugamela is almost impossible to comprehend in terms of what it means for the ancient world, because in a single day, in 9 hours of fighting, the Achaemenid Empire has been effectively destroyed, not just defeated but broken beyond repair. And here is why. When Darius fled, he abandoned not just the battlefield but his legitimacy, his authority, his sacred role as King of Kings, and while he will flee east, will try to raise new armies, will attempt to continue the fight, he has lost something irreplaceable, the aura of Persian invincibility, the belief that the empire is eternal and its ruler is chosen by the gods. And Alexander understands this, understands that what he has won is not just a tactical victory but a psychological and political earthquake that will redraw the map of the known world. And within weeks of Gaugamela, Persian satraps are surrendering without a fight. Cities are opening their gates to Alexander. Treasuries accumulated over 2 centuries of Persian rule are falling into Macedonian hands, and Alexander marches into Babylon and the inhabitants welcome him as a liberator, drape his path with flowers, and he marches to Susa where the royal treasure contains enough gold and silver to fund his army for decades. And then he marches to Persepolis, the ceremonial capital, the spiritual heart of the Persian Empire, and he allows his soldiers to sack it, to take revenge for the Persian invasion of Greece a century and a half earlier. And the city burns, the great palaces of Xerxes and Darius go up in flames, and whether this is deliberate policy or a drunken accident has been debated for 2 millennia. But the symbolism is unmistakable. The old order is dead, the Persian Empire is finished, and Alexander is now the ruler of the largest empire the world has ever seen. stretching from Greece to the borders of India, and he is still only 25 years old. But to truly understand the magnitude of what happened at Gaugamela, you have to look at it not just strategically but tactically, because what Alexander achieved is something that military theorists still study and marvel at. He took an army outnumbered 5-1, fighting on ground specifically chosen and prepared by the enemy, and he didn't just win, he didn't just survive, he achieved a decisive, crushing, total victory by identifying the single point where the enemy was vulnerable, concentrating overwhelming force at that point and striking with perfect timing. And this is the essence of tactical genius, not having the most soldiers or the best equipment but understanding the geometry of battle, the psychology of combat, the way that force and timing and morale interact, and being able to make split-second decisions in the chaos of combat that exploit those factors. And Alexander had that genius to a degree that appears maybe once in a millennium. He could read a battlefield the way a chess grandmaster reads a board, could see patterns and possibilities that were invisible to everyone else. And more than that, he had the courage to act on his insights, to commit fully to plans that looked insane to conventional military thinking, to lead from the front and share the danger with his men. And this combination of intellectual brilliance and physical courage created a commander who seemed unstoppable. And at Gaugamela he was at the absolute peak of his powers, 25 years old, at the height of his physical abilities, with an army that had been training and fighting together for years and had developed an almost telepathic coordination. And against him stood Darius, who was not a bad general, not a coward despite his retreats, but who was conventional, predictable, who fought the way Persian kings had always fought, with mass and splendor rather than innovation and speed, and who made the fatal mistake of giving Alexander exactly the kind of battle Alexander wanted. A decisive engagement where there could be no doubt about the outcome, no excuses, just two armies and two kings and the question of who was better. The numbers alone tell a story that seems almost mythological. Alexander lost perhaps 700 men at Gaugamela by the most reliable ancient accounts, maybe a bit more, against a Persian army that lost tens of thousands, perhaps 40 or 50,000 dead and countless more scattered in the rout, never to return to their units. And these casualty ratios are so lopsided that some historians have questioned whether they can possibly be accurate, but they make sense when you understand the nature of ancient warfare, where most casualties occurred not in the battle itself but in the pursuit afterward, when a broken army turns and runs and cavalry cuts them down from behind. And the Persians at Gaugamela broke completely, fled in total panic, and were slaughtered as they ran, while Alexander's casualties were concentrated among the units that did most of the serious fighting, the companion cavalry that charged into the Persian center, the left wing under Parmenion that held against overwhelming numbers, and even there, the Macedonian discipline, armor, and training meant that they could take punishment and keep fighting in ways that the more lightly equipped Persians could not. And beyond the raw numbers, there is the strategic impact, because Darius escaped Gaugamela but he never recovered from it. He fled east into the Iranian plateau with Alexander in pursuit, and eventually his own satraps, recognizing that the cause was hopeless, arrested him and killed him, betrayed their own king to try to make peace with the conqueror. And when Alexander found Darius's body, dumped by the side of a road, murdered by his own men, he wept, or so the story goes, because he had genuinely respected his enemy, had admired Darius's courage in standing and fighting rather than surrendering. And he gave the dead king a royal funeral, honored him as a worthy opponent, and then married his daughter, because that is the kind of gesture Alexander made. Symbolic acts that blended ruthlessness with magnanimity, that showed he was not just conquering the Persian Empire but absorbing it, becoming its rightful heir. What is often missed in discussions of Gaugamela is how close Alexander actually came to disaster, because while the outcome appears inevitable in retrospect, during the battle there were multiple moments where things could have gone catastrophically wrong. When Parmenion was being overwhelmed and begged for help, Alexander could have rushed to his aid and lost the opportunity to strike at Darius, or he could have ignored Parmenion entirely and found himself victorious in the center but with his army destroyed on the flanks and his line of retreat cut off. And the decision to charge into the Persian center was itself incredibly risky, because if the gap had closed, if Darius had kept his nerve and stayed in position, Alexander would have been trapped deep in enemy territory with limited escape options. And there is a story, possibly apocryphal but revealing, that one of Alexander's officers asked him after the battle if he had been certain the charge would work. And Alexander replied that he had been certain Darius would run, that everything depended on breaking the Persian king's nerve, and this tells you something crucial about Alexander's method. He wasn't just studying enemy tactics and terrain, he was studying enemy psychology, understanding what Darius feared, what would make him break, and engineering a situation specifically designed to trigger that fear. And in that sense, Gaugamela was as much a psychological operation as a military one, a carefully staged demonstration of Macedonian superiority designed to shatter Persian morale and prove that Alexander was invincible, that fighting him was futile, that the gods themselves had chosen him to rule the world. The tactical innovations that Alexander displayed at Gaugamela would influence warfare for centuries. The use of combined arms tactics where different unit types support each other, the concentration of force at a decisive point rather than spreading strength evenly across the line, the importance of mobility and flexibility over raw numerical superiority, the devastating effectiveness of heavy cavalry when used as a penetration force rather than just for flanking and pursuit. All of these concepts became fundamental to military thinking, and generals from Hannibal to Napoleon to Rommel studied Alexander's battles and tried to apply his principles, and the Gaugamela campaign specifically became a textbook example of how to defeat a numerically superior enemy through superior generalship. And what is remarkable is that Alexander's methods worked not because he had some technological advantage. The Persians actually had more advanced armor and better cavalry horses in some respects. Not because his soldiers were inherently tougher or braver than the Persians, but because he had organized them better, trained them more rigorously, and led them with a clarity of purpose and vision that turned 47,000 men into a war machine capable of destroying an empire. And this raises a question that historians and military theorists still debate. To what extent was Alexander's success replicable? Could other generals have achieved the same results with the same army? Or was there something unique about Alexander himself, some combination of intelligence, courage, charisma, and tactical intuition that made him irreplaceable? And the answer seems to be that while many of Alexander's tactical innovations could be copied, the judgment to use them at the right moment, the ability to see patterns in the chaos of battle, the willingness to take calculated risks that would paralyze more cautious commanders, these were qualities that very few people in history have possessed, and Alexander had all of them to an extraordinary degree. There is also the question of what motivated Alexander, because by the time of Gaugamela he had already conquered more territory than his father Philip, had already achieved glory beyond what any Macedonian king had ever dreamed of. He could have stopped, could have consolidated his gains, could have returned to Macedonia as the greatest conqueror of his age. But he didn't. He kept going, pushed further into Asia, and after Gaugamela he would march all the way to India, would fight battles in deserts and mountains and monsoons, would lose more of his original companions to disease and exhaustion than to Persian weapons. And he seemed driven by something beyond mere ambition, beyond even glory. There was a restlessness in him, a need to see what was beyond the next horizon, to test himself against every challenge, and his tutor Aristotle had taught him that the Greeks were naturally superior to barbarians, that Hellenic culture was the highest achievement of human civilization. And Alexander seems to have internalized this but also complicated it, because as he conquered the Persian Empire he began adopting Persian customs, wearing Persian dress, marrying Persian wives, promoting Persian nobles to high positions, and his Macedonian veterans hated this. They wanted their king to remain purely Macedonian, to treat the conquered peoples as subjects not equals, and this created tensions that would eventually contribute to Alexander's downfall. But at Gaugamela those tensions were still in the future. On that October day in 331 BC, Alexander was still the golden boy, still invincible, still the living embodiment of everything the Macedonians believed about their own superiority. And the victory at Gaugamela seemed to prove that the gods themselves had chosen him for greatness. The battle also demonstrates something about the nature of ancient warfare that is easy to miss from a modern perspective. which is that battles were not just military events but ritual contests between kings, with enormous symbolic and religious significance, and Darius had built an altar at Gaugamela and made sacrifices to ensure divine favor, and he had consulted oracles and performed the traditional Persian ceremonies. And all of this was supposed to guarantee victory. And when he lost, when he fled, it wasn't just a military defeat, it was a cosmic catastrophe. Proof that the gods had withdrawn their favor from the Persian Empire, that the natural order had shifted, and this is why the empire collapsed so quickly after Gaugamela, because the battle wasn't just about who had better tactics or more soldiers, it was about legitimacy, about which king had the right to rule, and Alexander's victory was interpreted as divine judgment, as proof that he was the rightful king of Asia, and this gave him a political and psychological advantage that mere military victory could not have provided, because people across the empire, from Babylonian priests to Egyptian pharaohs to Indian rajas, began to see Alexander not as a foreign invader but as the next great emperor, as someone chosen by fate to unify the world, and Alexander encouraged this interpretation, presented himself as the liberator of peoples oppressed by Persian rule, as the bringer of Greek civilization to the barbarian East, as a semi-divine figure descended from Achilles and Heracles, and whether he actually believed this himself or was simply an opportunistic propagandist is one of the great unsolved questions about his character. But what is clear is that after Gaugamela he had the power to make others believe it, and that belief became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Looking at the battle from Darius's perspective, what is tragic is that he did almost everything right in terms of conventional military wisdom. He chose ground favorable to his forces. He gathered overwhelming numerical superiority. He prepared contingencies and backup plans. He positioned himself where he could command and control his forces. He used his specialized units like the scythe chariots and war elephants at appropriate moments, and he should have won by any reasonable military calculation. He should have crushed Alexander's army, but he failed to account for the one variable that made all the difference: Alexander himself. And this is both Darius's personal tragedy and a broader lesson about warfare, that there are moments when individual genius can trump every conventional advantage, when the decisions of a single mind operating at peak capability can overcome what should be insurmountable odds. And Darius was not facing a normal enemy, he was facing perhaps the greatest tactical mind in military history, someone who saw the battlefield differently, who understood angles and timing and psychology at a level that appears almost superhuman, and no amount of preparation or numerical superiority could compensate for that disparity in ability. And when Darius fled, he was not being cowardly, he was being rational. He could see that Alexander was going to reach him, that his bodyguard could not hold, that he was going to die if he stayed, and in that moment, his survival instinct overrode his honor, and he made the choice that sealed his fate and his empire's fate, because a king who runs from battle has forfeited his right to rule, and everyone knew it, including Darius himself. The legacy of Gaugamela extends far beyond the immediate military outcome, because what Alexander created in the aftermath was not just an empire but a fusion of cultures that would reshape the entire ancient world. The Hellenistic civilization that blended Greek and Persian and Egyptian and Indian elements into something new. And this would not have been possible without Gaugamela, because that battle broke the Persian Empire's power so completely that Alexander could impose his vision on the conquered territories, could found cities, could spread Greek language and philosophy, could create the cultural synthesis that would define the Mediterranean and Near Eastern world for the next 3 centuries. And when you look at the influence of Greek thought on early Christianity, on Islamic philosophy, on Renaissance humanism, you can trace a direct line back to Alexander's conquests and to Gaugamela specifically, because that was the moment when the barrier between East and West came down, when the Greek world burst out of its Mediterranean confines and merged with the ancient civilizations of Asia, and the world was never the same, and it all hinged on 9 hours of fighting on a dusty plain in continue 14:06 northern Mesopotamia. Hinged on one young man's ability to see a gap in the enemy line and exploit it with perfect timing and overwhelming force, hinged on his willingness to risk everything on a single charge, to bet his life and his army and his dreams of conquest on the belief that he could break through to the enemy king before his own flanks collapsed. And it worked, against all reasonable probability it worked, and an empire that had ruled the known world for 200 years ceased to exist, and a new age began. What is haunting about Gaugamela, looking back from the perspective of 23 centuries, is how it demonstrates both the power and the limitations of military genius, because Alexander won the greatest tactical victory in ancient history, achieved something that military analysts still study in awe, but what did it ultimately accomplish? What did he actually create that lasted? Because Alexander himself would be dead within 8 years of Gaugamela, would die in Babylon at age 32, possibly from disease, possibly from poison, possibly from alcoholism, and his empire would immediately fracture into warring kingdoms ruled by his generals, and the unity he imposed would dissolve, and within a few generations the Hellenistic kingdoms would themselves be conquered by Rome, and the Persian Empire would eventually rise again under the Parthians and Sassanids, and the great cultural fusion he created would be disrupted by new invasions and new religions. And if you look at the Middle East today, you can find very few traces of Alexander's actual political legacy. His cities have crumbled, his bloodline is extinct, his empire exists only in history books, and yet, there is something that survived, something intangible but profound, because Alexander proved that the world could be unified, that different peoples could be brought together under a single system, that the barriers between civilizations were not impermeable, and this idea, this vision of a cosmopolitan world order that transcends tribal and national divisions, this is Alexander's real legacy. This is what survived Gaugamela and all his other conquests, and it has influenced every empire and every would-be world conqueror ever since. From Rome to the Mongols to Napoleon to the modern globalizers, they all looked back to Alexander as the prototype, the first person to successfully merge East and West, and the fact that his achievement was temporary, that it fell apart almost immediately after his death, does not diminish the power of the idea, because he proved it was possible, proved that one extraordinary individual with enough vision and courage and tactical brilliance could reshape the world, even if only for a moment. The soldiers who fought at Gaugamela, the ones who survived, would spend the rest of their lives telling stories about that day, about the impossible odds, about Alexander's charge into the Persian center, about the moment when the entire enemy army broke and fled, and these stories would be passed down through generations, would be written down by historians, would inspire poets and painters and eventually filmmakers, because there is something in the human spirit that responds to stories of impossible victories, of the underdog who overcomes overwhelming odds through courage and intelligence, and Gaugamela is the archetypal example of that narrative. It has everything. The young hero facing impossible odds, the evil empire that must be defeated, the moment of maximum danger when everything hangs in the balance, the brilliant stroke of genius that snatches victory from the jaws of defeat, the complete and total triumph that changes the world forever, and the fact that it actually happened, that this is not mythology but history, makes it even more powerful because it means that such things are possible, that human beings are capable of achieving the seemingly impossible when they have the right combination of skill and courage and leadership. And this is why people still study Gaugamela, still write about it, still try to understand how Alexander did what he did, because embedded in that story is a message about human potential, about what we can accomplish when we refuse to accept limitations, when we study our challenges with rigorous intelligence, when we act with decisive courage at the crucial moment, and when we inspire others to follow us into danger because they believe in our vision and our leadership. There is also a darker lesson in Gaugamela, which is about the fragility of empires and the role of individuals in history, because the Persian Empire did not fall because it was weak or decadent or rotting from within. It fell because one extraordinarily capable enemy appeared at a moment when the empire's leadership was not capable of matching him. And this raises uncomfortable questions about historical determinism and the role of contingency, because what if Alexander had died in one of his many close calls with death? Would the Persian Empire have survived for centuries more? Would the Hellenistic age never have happened? Would the entire trajectory of Western civilization be different? And the answer is probably yes, because for all the talk of historical forces and economic determinism and cultural evolution, There are moments when everything pivots on the decisions of individuals, and Gaugamela was one of those moments. It was not inevitable. Alexander could have lost. Darius could have stood his ground. The charge could have been stopped. And if any of those things had happened, the world would be fundamentally different. And this is both thrilling and terrifying. Thrilling because it means that individuals matter, that great leaders can change the course of history. But terrifying because it means that history is not following some rational plan, that the fate of millions can depend on whether one man's horse gets wounded at the wrong moment, whether one king's nerve holds or breaks, whether a gap appears in a battle line at exactly the right instant, and Gaugamela demonstrates this with perfect clarity. 9 hours that changed everything, that destroyed an empire and created another, that set in motion cultural transformations that would echo for millennia. All because a 25-year-old Macedonian king was able to see a weakness in his enemy's formation and exploit it with perfect timing. The final irony of Gaugamela is that Alexander, for all his military genius, for all his tactical brilliance, for all his world historical importance, was also deeply flawed as a human being. He was an alcoholic who would kill trusted friends in drunken rages. He was paranoid and saw conspiracies everywhere. He was cruel and capable of massacring entire cities when his temper was aroused. He was driven by an insatiable ambition that eventually alienated even his closest companions. And he died. Young, burned out, possibly murdered by his own officers who had grown sick of his endless campaigns and his adoption of Persian customs. And in his final years he became increasingly megalomaniacal, demanded to be worshipped as a god, planned conquests of Arabia and the Western Mediterranean that would have dwarfed even his Asian campaigns, and showed signs of losing touch with reality. And this raises the question of whether the qualities that made him great at Gaugamela, the audacity, the willingness to risk everything, the unshakable self-belief, the restless ambition, whether these same qualities ultimately destroyed him, whether you can be the kind of person who wins impossible victories without also being the kind of person who cannot accept limits, who cannot be satisfied, who eventually goes too far and falls. And the answer seems to be that for Alexander at least, the genius and the madness were inseparable, that the same mind that could decode the geometry of battle with supernatural clarity was also susceptible to delusions of divine favor, that the same courage that led him to charge into the Persian center would later lead him to pointless battles in the mountains of Afghanistan and the jungles of India where his men died for no purpose except his glory, and that the same charisma that inspired 47,000 Macedonians to defeat 250,000 Persians would eventually be used to justify atrocities and megalomania. But none of this changes what he accomplished at Gaugamela, because on that one perfect day in October 331 BCE, Alexander was functioning at the absolute peak of human capability, was demonstrating what military genius looks like when it is combined with perfect preparation and flawless execution. And the fact that he was also a deeply flawed and ultimately tragic figure does not diminish that achievement. It makes it more human, more real, more relevant, because it shows that greatness does not require perfection, that you can change the world even while being broken in important ways, that the people who accomplish impossible things are not superhuman but intensely, sometimes disturbingly human, with all the contradictions and flaws that implies. So when we remember Gaugamela, when we tell the story of how 47,000 Macedonians defeated 250,000 Persians and destroyed an empire in a single day, we are not just remembering a battle, we are remembering a moment when human genius operated at its highest level, when one person's vision and courage and tactical brilliance overcame every conventional advantage, when the impossible became possible because someone refused to accept that it was impossible. And whether we see Alexander as hero or villain, as liberator or conqueror, as genius or madman, what we cannot deny is that he changed the world forever on that dusty plain, that he proved that empires are not eternal, that numerical superiority is not decisive, that the right person in the right place at the right moment can accomplish miracles, and that in the end, what matters most in battle is not the size of the army but the quality of the mind that commands it. And at Gaugamela, Alexander's mind was operating at a level that has rarely been matched in military history before or since, and that is why we still study it, still marvel at it, still try to understand how he did what he did, because somewhere in that story is a lesson about human potential, about what we are capable of when we refuse to be limited by conventional thinking, when we study our challenges with ruthless intelligence, when we act with decisive courage at the crucial moment, and when we inspire others to believe in our vision enough to follow us into impossible situations. And that lesson is as relevant now as it was 23 centuries ago, because the world is still full of impossible challenges, and we still need people who can look at overwhelming odds and see not an insurmountable obstacle but a problem to be solved, a pattern to be decoded, a weakness to be exploited. And that is what Alexander did at Gaugamela, and that is why his victory there will be remembered and studied as long as human beings tell stories about courage and genius and the moments when everything changes forever.